Inside this were a deed, a survey, 3 letters, and a map showing that spring. Enough paper to cause me trouble, not enough paper to bring her back. He smiled slightly. Tomorrow this leaves with my wagons. By noon, it becomes ash. By sundown, your land is whatever my lawyer says it is. Elias looked at Mara. Her eyes were on the hat lying beside the wall. Not the box, the hat. Keel saw the glance too late. Mara dropped to one knee, rolled her shoulder against the post, and pulled the hidden razor free with her teeth. The blade flashed once. Rope fell from her wrists. The shed exploded into motion. Keel turned his rifle toward her. Elias kicked the barrel hard enough to crack his boot heel. The shot blew a hole through the roof. Mara drove her shoulder into Keel's ribs. They crashed into the barrel. The iron box hit the floor and burst open. Paper spilled across the straw. Deeds, maps, letters, and a small silver locket with a broken clasp. Clara's locket. Elias saw it and forgot the ropes on his hands. Keel went for his revolver. Mara reached first. She did not shoot him. She shot the lantern. Darkness swallowed the shed. Men shouted outside. Horses screamed. Fire climbed the spilled oil. A wall this time, but into a low, bright line between Keel and the open door. Elias pulled one hand free, then the other. He grabbed the deed papers while Mara caught the locket and the survey map. Keel lunged through the smoke. Elias met him with the barrel of an unloaded shotgun. Not because he was a fighter, because grief can teach a gentle man exactly where to put his weight. Keel hit the ground with blood in his mouth. Elias stood over him, shaking. Keel smiled through red teeth. "Go on, farmer. Be what the fire made you." Mara's voice came from the smoke. "No," Elias looked at her. "The fire made enough monsters," she said. The revolver lay inches from Elias's boot. For 6 years Elias had imagined this moment. He had imagined the shot, the silence after it, the satisfaction people promised themselves when pain had no other shape. Now, with Keel at his feet and Clara's locket in his hand, Elias understood the cruelest part. Killing him would not bring one laugh back into that house. It would only give the fire another thing it had changed. Elias picked up the revolver. Then he emptied the cylinder into his palm and threw the gun beyond the flames. Mara held Keel at gunpoint while Elias carried the papers out into the yard. By then the ranch hands had gathered, but so had 3 riders from the Territorial Marshal's Line camp. Mara had sent a warning 2 nights before from Mercy Crossing by bribing the telegraph clerk with a ruby ring she had taken off a dead gambler years ago. She had not told Elias because hope was too dangerous to hand a grieving man before it arrived. The lead marshal read the survey by lantern light, then the letters, then Vane's private ledger found in the iron box beneath a false bottom. Names, payments, bribes, burned farms, bought graves. Silas Vane tried to walk away before the marshal closed the ledger. Mara stepped into his path. For a moment, every man there remembered the stories. The black wren, the woman who moved like smoke, the gun no one beat. But Mara did not draw. She unpinned the black hat from her hair and let it fall in the mud. "My name is Mara Vale," she said. "6 years ago, Silas Vane paid me to stand watch at the Rowan place. I did. Amos Keel fired it. Vane ordered it. I kept quiet because shame was easier than truth." The yard went silent. Then the marshal took Silas Vane by the arm. Keel, bleeding and cursing, was dragged out behind him. By morning the wagons had not left, the papers had not burned, and the land Silas Vane had tried to steal had a name again: Rowan. Elias returned to the ruins at sunset with Clara's locket, the survey, and the burned toy horse wrapped in cloth. Mara came with him, but stayed beyond the grave fence. Elias knelt between the two crosses. For a long time he said nothing. He placed the locket at Clara's marker. He placed the toy horse at Ada's. The red side faced the sun, the black side faced the earth. Mara watched from the cottonwood stump, hatless for the first time Elias had seen her. Without the brim and shadow, she looked less like a legend and more like a tired woman who had finally set down a weapon she had been holding for years. "I can't give them back," she said. Elias stood slowly. "Oh," he answered, "but you gave me the truth." The answer stayed between them until the coyotes began calling from the ridges. Later, when Elias pretended to sleep, he saw Mara sitting awake with her pistol across her knees and the burned toy horse in her hand. She turned it carefully. Red side, black side. Red side, black side. As if weighing the part of the world that survived against the part that did not. On the second morning, Mara led him west instead of north. "Vane's ranch is that way," Elias said. "We're going to your place first." "I buried my family there. I don't need to see it." "Yes," Mara said, "you do." The Rowan place appeared near noon as a line of black teeth and yellow grass. The stone foundation remained. The chimney stood alone. The barn had folded into itself. The old cottonwood where Ada once tied scraps of ribbon for pretend fairs was nothing but a charred fork stabbing at the sky. Elias dismounted before the horse stopped. He walked through the outline of rooms that existed only in memory. Here was the kitchen. Here Clara had sung while kneading dough. Here Ada had dragged a blanket and declared it a palace. Here was the hallway. Here was the beam. Elias stopped at the place where it had fallen. His breath left him so suddenly he bent forward like a man struck. "I took one step," he said. Mara stood behind him. Once she did not sound like the black wren. She sounded like a woman standing in ashes. "The beam was falling before you moved." Elias closed his eyes. "You don't know that." "I saw it." He turned toward her. Mara did not look away. Keel had already thrown kerosene through the front room and the side wall. The roof brace caught first. When your wife screamed, the beam was already cracking. You could have run straight to them, and it still would have come down. For 6 years, Elias had punished himself for a second that never existed. He sank to one knee in the dust, through the ruin, lifting ash that had no right to still be there. Mara walked to the small fenced graves near the cottonwood and stopped before the two wooden crosses. Clara Rowan, Ada Rowan. Elias had carved the names himself, with hands wrapped in bandages. "I should have shot Keel that night," Mara said. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was young enough to think not lighting the match made my hands clean." Elias looked at the graves. "Did it?" "No." That was all she said. It was enough. They left the ruins in the afternoon and reached Vane's North Ranch after dark. It was not a house so much as a small kingdom of timber, corrals, armed men, and lamplight. Cattle crowded the pens. Wagons stood loaded beside the long barn. Mara counted 6 riders near the gate, 2 by the bunkhouse, 1 on the loft walk, and another shadow moving behind the office window. "Too many," Elias whispered. "For a fight," Mara said. "Not for a truth." Before he could ask what that meant, a voice behind them said, "Truth don't stop bullets." Amos Keel stepped from the mesquite with a rifle in his hands. The scar over his left brow shone pale in the moonlight. Elias knew him before Mara moved. Keel grinned. "Well now," called out of his grave, and the wren brought him home. Mara's pistol was already out, but 2 more rifles cocked from the dark. Keel wagged his barrel toward the barn. "Vane said you'd come back some day. Said guilt always rides in a circle." They tied Elias to a post in the lambing shed, where old straw smelled of blood and rot. They took Mara's gun, her knife, her boot blade, and the small derringer from inside her sleeve. They did not find the razor sewn beneath the black band of her hat. Keel stood close enough for Elias to smell tobacco on his breath. "You know what I remember about your place?" Keel asked. "That little girl had a toy horse. Red thing." "That little girl had a toy horse. Red thing. Stupid looking." Elias pulled against the rope until it cut his wrists. Keel laughed. "There it is. That is the look." He reached into Elias's coat and found the burned horse. For a second, even Keel's smile faltered. Then he tossed it into the dirt. Should have burned cleaner. Mara looked at the toy in the dust. Something in her face went still in a different way. Silas Vane arrived near midnight in a gray coat too fine for the ranch mud. He was lean, silver-haired, clean as a courthouse lie. Behind him, a foreman carried the iron deed box Elias had believed lost to fire. Vane set it on a barrel. "Your wife was stubborn," he told Elias. "Stubborn people confuse property with virtue." Elias stared at the box. Vane tapped the lid. The burned toy horse was no bigger than a man's thumb, but it made the whole saloon forget how to breathe. Elias Rowan carried it hidden in his fist when he pushed through the bat-wing doors of Mercy Crossing. He did not look like trouble. His coat had been brushed thin at the elbows. His boots were cracked from miles of dry road, and his face had the pale, hollow patience of a man who had run out of everything except one last question. The men inside noticed him, then dismissed him, until they saw where he was walking. Mara Vale sat alone in the back corner, where she could see both doors, the stairwell, and the mirror behind the bar. They called her the Black Wren, because men liked giving pretty names to things that frightened them. She wore a long black trail coat, black trousers, black gloves, and the hat pulled low enough to turn her face into shadow. The only gentle thing on her table was a chipped white cup of chamomile tea, steam curling from it like a prayer that had lost its way. Elias crossed the room. The card players stopped moving their hands. The bartender quit polishing a glass. Even the old piano near the wall dropped into silence, one crooked note at a time. Elias pulled out the chair opposite Mara and sat down. Mara did not lift her eyes from the tea. "That chair," she said, voice low and level, "has buried better men than you." Elias opened his fist. The little horse lay across his palm. It had once been painted red. One side still held the tiny carved mane, the small bright saddle, the careful mark of a father's knife. The other side was blackened, nearly smooth. Heat had bubbled the paint and melted one glass eye into a dull bead. He placed it between her tea and her gun hand. "I don't want your chair," he said. "I want the name of the man who lit my house." For the first time, Mara Vale looked at him. Not at the gun he did not carry, not at his empty hands, at the burned horse. And every man in the saloon understood at once that Elias Rowan had not come to Mercy Crossing by mistake. He had brought a ghost to the only woman in the territory who might recognize it. 6 years earlier, Elias owned a poor patch of land west of the Bitter Fork, where the soil was hard, the grass was stubborn, and the wind could strip paint off a barn if it stayed angry long enough. He had a wife named Clara, a daughter named Ada, 2 milk cows, 18 head of cattle, and a house he had built plank by plank after the war. It was not much, but it was his. Then the dry seasons came. The creek lowered first. Then the pond shrank to a brown eye in the field. Cattle began chewing fence rails. Ada stopped asking why the calves were so skinny, because children learn which questions hurt adults. Clara kept a jar of rainwater on the windowsill, as if saving proof that God had not forgotten them completely. On the 3rd dry year, Elias found the letters. They were tucked inside Clara's sewing trunk, tied with green ribbon beneath a folded baby dress and a pressed bluebonnet. He had not opened that trunk since the funeral. The house was already gone by then, but he had carried the trunk out of the ruins because he could not bear to leave all of Clara behind in the ash. The letters were from Clara's older brother in Mercy Crossing. They told of a cattle baron named Silas Vane, who owned the sheriff, the bank, and most of the men who pretended not to know it. Vane wanted the Rowan place because it sat above a hidden spring the old survey maps had missed. Clara had known. She had written for help. She had written that Vane's riders had come once already and warned her there were easier ways to move a family than buying them out. The last letter had one sentence underlined so hard the paper tore. "If the woman in black comes through again, show her the survey copy. They say Mara Vale hates Vane worse than any lawman does." Elias read that sentence until the lamp burned down. Then he packed the letters, the burned toy horse, and the last clean shirt he owned. He sold his remaining cattle for less than half their worth, and rode toward Mercy Crossing with a kind of purpose that does not feel brave while it is happening. It only feels like the next breath. Because 6 years before, on a moonless night, his home had burned so fast it seemed the dark itself had caught fire. He woke to the smell of kerosene, not smoke, kerosene, sharp, oily, deliberate. By the time he reached the hall, the windows were orange and the roof was roaring. Clara stood at the far end, with Ada pressed against her chest, both of them lit by firelight that made them look already half gone. "Back door!" Clara screamed. Elias took one step toward the iron deed box under the side table. One step. A burning bean came down between them. He remembered the sound more than the sight, a cracking report like a rifle shot in a church. He remembered Clara's mouth opening behind the wall of flame. He remembered Ada's tiny hand reaching over her mother's shoulder. Then smoke took his lungs, and heat drove him through a kitchen window into the dirt. He crawled, bleeding and half blind, and turned back in time to see two figures standing in the yard. One was broad, with a scar pale across his brow. The other was slender, dressed in black, face hidden beneath a hat. They watched the house burn. When the roof collapsed, the broad man laughed. The one in black did not. That was the memory that brought Elias to the saloon. Not a rumor, not a wanted poster, a silhouette cut into his mind by fire. Now the silhouette sat across from him with a cup of tea growing cold. Mara did not touch the horse. Her gloved fingers tightened once, almost too small for anyone to see. Elias saw it because for 6 years he had looked for movement in the dead. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "I carved it for my daughter." A muscle shifted in her jaw. "Her name was Ada," he said. "She carried it in her apron pocket. I found it 3 days later where the rain barrel used to be." No one spoke. The saloon seemed to lean closer. Elias reached inside his coat and laid Clara's torn letter beside the horse. The paper had browned at the edges. The green ribbon was gone. Her handwriting still lived on the page. Mara read the underlined line without moving her lips. "If the woman in black comes through again." Her face did not change, but something behind it did. Something old stepped out. "I was told it was an empty house," she said. The words were barely above a whisper. Elias stared at her. Mara looked up. "Vane said the family had gone. He paid me to stand watch while his men forced open a deed box. He said no fire, no killing. But you stood there." "I stood there." "And the man with the scar?" Mara's eyes hardened. "Amos Keel." The name entered the room like a knife laid on a table. "He poured the kerosene," Elias said. "He did worse than that," Mara answered. "He kept the deed box." Elias had thought there was nothing left inside him to break. He was wrong. The box burned. "No," Mara said. The beam fell. The world narrowed around Elias. The iron box. The one step. The guilt he had worn like a collar for 6 years. The belief that his hesitation had killed Clara and Ada. Mara saw the shape of it in his face. "You did not kill them," she said. The words struck harder than any bullet. Elias could not answer. Mara rose, placed 2 coins beside the tea, and looked once around the room. Every eye fell away. "Keel rides for Vane's North Ranch tonight," she said. "If you go alone, you'll die before he finishes laughing. I didn't ask you to come." "No," she said, "I have been running from." She stepped past him toward the doors. Elias gathered the letter and the burned horse. For a moment he stayed in the chair, shaking with a rage so old it had begun to feel like bone. Then he stood and followed the woman in black into the white heat of afternoon. They rode north without speaking until Mercy Crossing became a smear of dust behind them. Mara rode like a blade carried by the wind. No wasted motion, no turning in the saddle unless there was a reason. Elias rode behind her on a tired bay gelding that had seen kinder years. Between them hung the silence of 2 people connected by the same crime from opposite sides of the flame. At sundown they made camp in a dry wash, low enough to hide the fire and high enough to see riders coming. Mara built a bed of coals no brighter than a sleeping ember. She handed Elias hardtack and strips of salted beef. He took them. "You could have told someone," he said at last. "Who would I tell?" "The law. In Mercy Crossing, the law sleeps in Silas Vane's pocket." "Then a judge." "Vane buys paper before men learn to read it." Elias looked at her across the low glow. "So you became a ghost." Mara's mouth twitched, but it was not a smile. "No," she said, "ghosts are dead. Worse, I kept living." Mara looked toward the horizon. "That is a small thing." It was the only thing left big enough to carry. The wind moved over the ruined foundation. It did not roar now. It only passed through, soft and ordinary, lifting dust and laying it down again. Elias turned to the little grave. For 6 years the horse had been proof of what the fire took. Now it was proof of what the fire failed to finish. For the first time since that night, Elias Rowan walked away from the ashes without carrying them in his hand. The toy stayed behind, and the fire did not own it any more.